Hi, I'm David Eads. I'm the design and delivery editor at the Chicago Reporter, an almost 50-year-old organization devoted to covering race, poverty, and class in Chicago. And what my title means is that I think about how to take technology, design, code, data, and turn it into something potent and powerful and that can hold people accountable, but using modern tools of technology. And I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Asraa, who's going to tell you a little bit about some of the problems that we face as data journalists.
Yeah, I'm Asraa. I'm the digital editor at the Reporter. So I do a lot of web stuff, a lot of editing, not like a coder, not highly technical. So I'm going to kind of show you about the interface of what someone like David and someone like me uses Hasura together in the newsroom. Oh, sorry, I'm already messing up. Okay. Yeah, so basically, Hasura has really kind of turbocharged some of our processes in terms of the amount of analysis and the possibilities of our analysis in our newsroom. And to put it short, like Hasura allows us to spend less time doing data wrangling, which is part of any data journalist job, which opens up more time and headspace for editing, reporting, and design. And I'm going to show you an example of how. So last year was the municipal election in Chicago. We wanted to do a very standard data-driven report on campaign finance. How much money are these candidates raising? Who's donating to them? How are they spending it? So this slide kind of shows you the typical process that we went through at that time. All of us, but mainly our reporter, Josh McGee, goes to this government-run website that stores all these different kinds of reports, and all these reports are kind of designed with the government's interest in mind. So they're kind of overlapping and kind of not in the categories that journalists might want. So there's a report that's quarterly, there's a report for small donations, large donations, what they spent it on. We export all of those spreadsheets and kind of wrangle it into this crazy spreadsheet that you see in the bottom left. And that kind of gives us a space to do analysis. Sometimes it's simple functions, sometimes it's pivot tables, but that's kind of the space. Ultimately, all of that analysis, asking different questions of the data yields something like you see in the bottom right, which is a headline you might see pop up on your phone, which is like, a lot of times data analysis is conveyed or characterized through words, even though there was a lot of numbers and data wrangling behind it. And as an editor, sometimes it can be quite frustrating for the reporter because Josh might come to me and be like, okay, I figured it out. The candidates have raised 16 million. And I might scratch my chin and be like, okay, well, how does that compare to the previous election? He might have to go back all through this process and pull the same reports for last election, make sure he exported it the same way, did the functions the same way, and then be able to build on our initial questions. This was last year. A couple months later, David joined our team and introduced our newsroom to Hasura, which really changed how we do campaign analyses like this and what we can do with the analysis afterwards. So David's going to show you that.
Yeah, so this is a great example of sort of how we're using Hasura for reporting. So what you see here is an observable notebook. Me, is typing in the name of a candidate and all of a sudden gets a report based on a Hasura API with information about how much money they've received, how much money they've spent, who their top donors are, who their top donors were during certain years, all sorts of information that's very useful for reporting. But even then, those reports that we're generating, and you can tell this isn't super fancy, may not answer a reporter's question. But this is so important because what we can do here is we can say, you can get the slice of the data that you need to be able to analyze it in the tool that you're familiar with. And that's so very important in our field because technical resources are incredibly scarce. We're going to say this several times, I think, during this presentation. The biggest newsrooms in the country have less engineers on staff than Hasura did probably in its first month after being founded. I mean, it's really, really constrained. And so being able to sort of take this funky, awkward, difficult government data, get it into this sort of halfway interface, and then make it easy for people to sort of slice and dice the way that they're going to be able to find meaning in it, has turned out to be incredibly powerful for us, and just opened up things that we haven't been able to do before, including this comparison that Asraa is going to show you.
Yeah, so basically we have one developer on our team, David, and he was kind of able to turbocharge the analysis through Hasura and Observable. And that kind of freed us up a lot to focus on more questions, more reporting, and more design. So this is one example of a way that we were able to use Hasura to quickly query a lot of related data questions and kind of present it compellingly. So we were able to put together something like this, which is very data rich. You're seeing a lot of different data points, like how much the candidates raised, at what pace, from whom, in one spot, which especially for the modern news consumer could be a lot more informative and much more efficient way to convey information than just the headline that I showed you before. So that's kind of, it's not that these kind of graphics would be impossible before, but it would be a lot more work and a lot of doing these analyses separately. And then that's why even today, a lot of the biggest news rooms in our city, they still default to describing all this analysis in words, because it's so hard to do all the analysis and it's all segmented that it's easier to convey it in long paragraphs. But these days, most people are not reading long stories on their phone every day. You're seeing it in your timeline. You want a snapshot of information. And so Hasura just allows a really small newsroom like ours to do pretty sophisticated stuff and really kind of change our news. So this was basically an example of us going deep on like government data on a specific topic that's all kind of relevant. It's all kind of built in one place. David's going to talk about an example of putting together data from very disparate sources.
So this was a project that I did with ProPublica, Illinois, the place where I worked before this, and it shows parking ticket information or car tickets. It could be for not having the right kind of registration, but tickets that people get related to their motor vehicle. And in Chicago, it's basically like another tax that you pay for living in the city. You pay a registration fee. If you don't pay the registration fee, you're hit with tremendous numbers of fines. One of the few cities in the United States that a significant portion of its entire city budget comes from the collection of these fines and fees. And as you might be able to guess, it primarily affects people in impoverished, vulnerable communities, and typically those are African American people in this city. So this is a much larger use of Hasura. So we have this complicated ingestion engine, and really are joining a couple of different kind of key data sources. And so this is a really important thing that I think all enterprise data users have to do, and journalists certainly have to do, which is to take some data from the city of Chicago, from the Chicago Department of Finance, from the U.S. Census Bureau, geocode it using Geocodio, then take something like Google Sheets. I think we do need to switch back to the previous slide.
Sorry, back a slide?
Yeah, back one slide. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No. Yeah, so this had multiple data inputs at Chicago Department of Finance, U.S. Census Bureau. There was a geocoding step using a third-party service. We used Google Sheets to bring in some of the text that you see there, just like the intro paragraph and things like that. And so Hasura is really, really critical in sort of being a front end to this orchestrated data ingestion process. And then the other thing I'll say is that it was also really important to use Gatsby as the actual site generator here. It worked very, very well with Hasura. I think this is probably one of the first production news websites that use these two technologies together. And giving us that unified API. So, being able to say that we don't know, being able to combine all these different data sources and then query them in the same way is just remarkably powerful for us. And then there's some other examples. So this is Big Local News. It's a Stanford project. These are not necessarily running Hasura, but represent major investment in GraphQL and the GraphQL ecosystem. I don't know what Big Local News is running. The next one we'll show you is Open States, and this is a really interesting one. So Open States collects the legislative activity of every state in the United States. So you can find out who the elected officials are, what they're voting on. It sort of aggregates and scrapes information from all these different states to provide sort of a big picture view of what's happening in state government. And so this is now using a GraphQL interface. I know this one is actually Django powered or Python powered, but this is a really important GraphQL interface, and we're going to talk about it a little bit at the end when we talk about remote joins as well. So why might newsrooms be skeptical of this, Asraa?
Yeah, so it's like this was a good fit for our newsroom because we have a developer and we kind of saw it as worth the investment in time. David can speak more to learning how to use Hasura and making it work for our interests. But journalists, editors, we're often, want to use the tools we're comfortable with and familiar with. And that's why this kind of halfway solution that Hasura gives us is really powerful, because ultimately, for all of the data wrangling that David, the developer on our team, was able to take care of, Josh, the reporter, is still going to export a CSV, but it's just like a much more refined slice of the data that he's getting much faster with a lot less room for error, and able to do it multiple times as his questions kind of evolve and his reporting kind of evolves. And that's just a pretty big game changer for reporters and editors alike. So like David was saying, it's not like a magic wand, but it is like an accelerator. And it's that halfway solution that allows us to meet the non-technical people on the team, myself included, to bring it back to the space where we're comfortable in, we're familiar with, we're well-versed in, to do the fundamentals of data that basically anyone in our newsroom, working in a spreadsheet is not like a technically advanced thing. But all of what David did with Hasura really brought the ball really far forward than where we were before.
And I think that, and I think that's really exciting for me because I don't want to be the choke point on any of these sorts of analyses. And somebody like Asraa being able to ask, well, how does this compare to the last time there was an election like this? And we say, oh, well, that's easy. Let me change the query. I'll get that data. I'll visualize it the same way I did the last one. Oh, that's interesting. And now we can design it together. It just opens up these possibilities and for seeing the world in different ways than we were able to before. Certainly, it's not to say people haven't been doing this. People obviously have been doing this, but a lot of the stuff has been hard for a team of 5 to execute. Now, there are still some issues that we've run into, at least with managing data, which I think I want to talk about next. So we've run into some sort of, I guess what the way to say it is that Hasura won't solve your extract, transform, load pipeline problems by itself. You'll always need tooling for ingesting data, processing it, making sure it's valid. There's no magic wand here. And we do think that it could help with ingesting JSON data, but that's actually quite rare in government. Even if you're getting it as JSON, it'll be a denormalized CSV that's just happens to be in JSON format. But we are working, or we are seeing some data coming out about COVID or other sorts of things where Hasura's ability to ingest the JSON object could be useful. What is really powerful is that it will integrate with industry-wide ETL solutions that are based on Postgres. And Postgres is basically the industry standard in newsrooms at this point. There are places that use MySQL, other things like that. But ultimately, Postgres is very, very widely adopted. It also will make your geodata easier to handle, but what we found is that it will make your geodata significantly easier to access in low barrier tools like QGIS, Mapbox, or other kinds of tools.
So yeah, I think these are examples of what's been done, what we've done. David's going to talk about what's kind of like the next horizon or the next frontier that we're hoping to go towards moving forward.
So two things that we're hoping, or that we expect. One thing that we expect is simply that there will be greater industry adoption of GraphQL. We're seeing places like the Washington Post using it, the San Francisco Chronicle, ourselves. It's just becoming a little more used. Stanford, as we saw before. And then another thing that we're really interested in is tiered access for handling sensitive information. So right now I have an API that has arrest data. It's in Hasura. And so we have a public-facing API that doesn't include people's names or ages, and a private side to that API that does include that information. So we think that could be a very powerful technique for providing public access to important data without compromising people's personal information.
Yeah, and then the other thing that's exciting for us that is the possibility of remote joins. So we were able to go deep on campaign finance using Hasura, and then state secrets goes deep on legislation. So as a journalist, it'd be really powerful to be able to see those joined or like together in one place. Again, that's just that turbocharging the analysis that would normally be very laboriously going through one at a time. The other thing is like for the consumer, a lot of obviously all of these tools are internal, like this is all happening behind the scenes, but the result is not invisible to the audience because it really allows us to make more mobile friendly ways to present our findings. Like I was saying earlier, news consumption habits have completely changed in the last 10 or 20 years. And this technology isn't just helping the developer have to spend less hours. It's also really changing what our newsroom can do for the reader, meeting the news consumer and meeting them where they are. And that's why I showed the graphic at the beginning. That's just like a richer way to present data than the traditional way, which is through like words and paragraphs that increasingly is not the best way to distribute it to a large and diverse audience. David, do you want to talk about real-time-ish information like election results and how getting closer but not quite there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the last thing I'll say, or sort of the end in terms of looking forward, there's a lot of data that real-time information could be incredibly useful. Election results are actually sort of the tip of the iceberg with that. There's far more important things, potentially during protests or evolving kind of news situations. And so the ability for kind of smaller news organizations to do real-time work is just going to become more important. And so we're going to need tools to do this. And, at this point, we do have a little bit of a public service announcement and a little bit of a disclaimer. I do want to say we're not here to promote Hasura. We just really like to use it. It's a tool that we find really useful. But we use lots of different kinds of tools. And then the other thing I just want to say, and hopefully Asraa can fill in as well, is that as we've said, this is resource constrained work, and we really need your support to be able to cover things like protests, COVID, everything else.